Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I hope everybody is doing great. Um, so far, we have actually covered most of the part in the marketing section of our course. Today, what we are going to study is basically the marketing research. Um, as we discussed earlier, that in order to actually improve or develop your product or the service, it is very important that one should actually get information from the market. And as per the requirement of the market, the product and all the service should actually be developed. Um, in our case, in this specifically in this lecture, we are going to actually look into different methods through which we can actually collect information, and this information then later can be used by you being a fresh startup, or you being an entrepreneur, for your product or the service, either for the improvement of your product or the service, or if you want to actually add something which or does not exist already in the market. So this market research actually helps you in gaining a potential opportunity or the gap in the market, which your competitors probably are not offering at this point of time. And you may also like to get an insight of the customer's opinion, that what do actually the customers want. So if you remember, we studied in the previous lecture, this slide we studied in the previous lecture, and this is basically the basic process and the basic model is for entrepreneurial marketing, and it actually gives the basic dimensions of entrepreneurial marketing. Whereas these dimensions actually give the different 7 dimensions, actually are connected to each other through one very important aspect, and which is actually residing just right here, which is basically the personal network, personal communication, and personal observation, right? So you being a fresh startup, uh, collection of an information or identification of the market gap potentially is not that easy, right? So you being fresh entrepreneur, you need to have the personal network. You need to actually develop a network. You need to develop the network with a different perspective. You need to develop the network so that you can actually get the market requirements. You need to develop the network with your suppliers so that the suppliers can actually give you a potential input that what actually is currently the trend of the market, right? So it's actually not the only one source, which is actually the customers through which you can actually get the information, but it is actually a collective information through different sources which you should be actually looking for, right? So your communication, your observation, your personal networking, that actually counts a lot when it comes to the information about the market and the gap of the market. So one should actually concentrate on these three things to actually gather the information. And this is exactly what, at the very basic level, at a very smaller level, when you are freshly starting, this is actually what matters. Go and contact the people you potentially think who might give you give you a little bit of a benefit. Go and contact people, communicate with the people who you think can actually buy your idea. Go and connect with the people who potentially you think are, or you think may become your customers, right? So they are actually going to give you the input, right? As far as the observations are concerned, it's basically the observations within the market, right? You're going to observe what the similar products are offering at this point of time. You need to observe this thing, that how your competitors are moving, what are their strategies, how are they actually mixing how are they actually mixing this you know mixing this mixing all the 4 P's or 7 P's when it comes to B, right? So Overall, these three things, which is the personal networking, personal communication, and personal observation, are the key for any of the fresh entrepreneur. As far as the developed organizations are concerned, they have got plenty of other resources through which they can actually collect the information. And one of the biggest resource that they have is actually the information system, right? Because they have a larger resource, they can actually implement the resource. So you being at a very beginning stage, you might not have such kind of the resources to actually put up that information system which can collect the data from a very large population. You might not have the resources to actually target a very large population for the information collection, right? So when it comes to the information collection, and when it comes to the collecting of the data, it's actually it's basically for you people, for a very fresh entrepreneur, is basically personal network and personal communication and personal observation. We'll discuss in ahead what are the further methods of collecting the data, right? But primarily it is important to understand that networking is not only through meeting the people personally, right? So networking can also be through the through different other means like social media. People talk on social media. People talk about the products or the services on the social media, right? If somebody doesn't like your service, they're probably going to talk about your services or your product on the social media. If they like about something about your product, if they're impressed with something, if they find something useful in your product, they might actually come and buy your product, and they might talk they will talk on social media. So it's about connecting with the customers on the social media, either through Twitter or Facebook page, or any other medium which comes out to be on the social media, right? So it's basically networking is not talking to the people one to one. When it comes to when it comes to uh, target your customer, or identify it in terms of at very initial stage, and then yes, you have to actually go for the one-to-one communication with the people. But slowly and gradually, as you grow and as you move ahead, that and as you actually find more resources, your means of collection of data will actually vary. Um, from one to one and from social media, then to the information system. It all matters how strategically you are moving and how much growth are you gaining over the period of time, right? So networking actually provides a feedback. We have already discussed that, and information related to the possible market gaps. We have already discussed this thing in the previous slide as well. Now, networking can help in identifying the market gaps, reducing the costs. Branding, very important. This branding is very important. You need to know that what actually are the demands of the market, and what are the things that the customers usually are valuing, because branding is all about valuing. If you actually value your customer and the customer is valuing your product, right, this means that you will eventually become a good brand, right? People are going to ask about that. So networking helps you in branding, right? So the job creation, which actually means at the very beginning you might be doing something, all of the data collection or the market survey by yourself, but over the period of time as you grow, you might actually would like to get some of the people on board while you are networking with the people who may help you in your data collection, right? Then expansion in existing network, obviously. Then innovation. Now, as far as the expansion in the existing network means, that is basically sort of a snowball technique, where you know a person at XYZ firm, and he has another contact, and he gives you or she gives you that contact in ABC firm, and you go and talk to them about your product, and that is how your network expands, right? So 1 to 2 and 2 to 4, and then you from to 4 to it becomes maybe 16 or maybe 8, right? So it actually totally depends how you move while you are networking. Uh, when we talk about the market research has some very important aspects. There are two types of the market researchers. One is actually the secondary research, which is this, right? And the second one is the primary research, which is this. When we talk about any sort of the research, we must understand that what our actual purpose is. What do we really want to do, right? What do we really want to uh, address? Which problem are we going to address? Now, there might be many problems that you might be addressing. You want to develop, you want to identify the gap. You want to identify the market size, market segment. You might actually be looking out for anything, right? So your purpose is actually going to derive what sort of the research are you people going to do, whether it is going to be the primary research or is it going to be the secondary research. So when we talk about the purpose, your purpose might be identification of the size of the market, right? You might like to see the trends in the market. You would like to forecast your any of the aspects, maybe the financial aspects you would like to forecast. So you would like to see how much customer base are you going to gain the next year, right? Or you might like to see that how much product consumption is it going to be in the market, right? So according to that, if you would like to plan, or the planning might be one of the purposes, evaluation of the strategy or the promotions, which is basically how should you actually go along with things. Whether within this strategy, this might be the branding strategy, this might be the promotion strategy, this might be your marketing mix strategy, whatever strategy that you're going to take. And then in order, if you're developing a marketing strategy or marketing mix strategy, you might like to understand that which of the P's are or maybe of high benefit, or which would be actually more beneficial when it comes to developing a marketing mix, right? So when we talk about the marketing mix, we have already seen that there are 7 P's, 3 for the services, 4 for the product. So I hope I don't need to actually emphasize further on this thing. But we can also do the market research if you want to identify the market segment, the consumer needs, right? Identify the competition, maybe the competitors that we are actually looking for, identifying opportunities or the gaps in the market, right? Reduce the risk. Now this is important. When we actually come to the when we actually see the identification of the customers, we would like to see that which of the features or which of the values are the competitors, or what strategy is competitor adopting to gain maximum customer or gain the maximum edge in the market. So what we can, because that thing is going to be the strength of our competitor, we need to actually reduce that risk where we can actually fall into a danger zone, where we might actually lose substantially a market competition or market share, right? So we would like to actually see what sort of, it is very important that what is exactly the purpose of our research is, because these purposes, now these are just, this is not exactly all the purposes. They can be anything else which you might, I mean, just it's basically not limited to the listed things over here, which might actually become one of the purpose of your research, right? So it can be actually some other purposes which you would like to. But the important point over here is that anything that you would like to do would actually derive, the purpose will actually derive whether you're going to actually do the primary research or the secondary research. For example, you're going for the forecasting, right? And you would like to forecast that how much sales are you going to have if over the period of time for the next year, or maybe for the next month. So what you can do is you can actually pick up the secondary data, which you actually have for past 7 years, or 5 years, or 2 years, or 3 years, and then you can actually forecast that with an estimation formula that what would be an estimated number of sales, or what would be an estimated number of consumption of your products. Right, so that can be actually one of the secondary researches, secondary data that is actually going to give you the forecast, right? Similarly, planning, for the planning, primary and the secondary research both counts. For marketing mix, your primary research counts, right? So it totally depends what is actually the purpose of your research. According to that, we will actually move towards the primary research and the secondary research. Then when we talk about the secondary research, there are two types of the resources that are important. One is your internal resource, and the second one is your external resource. Now, let's have a look at the internal resource and the external resource both. In the internal resource, we actually talk about the company accounts. Right, we can take out the company accounts, just like I've asked in the assignment that you should actually take up the financial statements of the listed companies, and then calculate the ratios. So what you can do is you can actually see that how the company had been doing over the past years, and you can actually project the profits, or might be a possibility. You can project the status of financial condition of any of the companies that you are studying, right? Just by looking at the company accounts, right? Internal reports and analysis. Now, internal reports and analysis are usually the project reports. They could be actually the progress reports. They could be any of the reports. There might be a possibility some marketing report, or might be a possibility the sales reports, and you can analyze those the reports of the internal report of the company and see and project the number of the sales. Similarly, it's not necessary that you would be actually doing only the projection or the forecasting. This internal report or the company accounts, the stock analysis, retail data, they can actually be used for anything. For example, if you remember that I gave you an example of 7-Eleven when we were studying market segmentation. At that time, we discussed that the POS of the 7-Eleven, what 7-Eleven did was that they actually collected the data from their POS, right? And they just saw that which product is being sold very frequently and in a very high amount, and in which area is that product being sold. So through this POS, what they did was they identified the area in which there was a highest number of the sales of a specific product, and they offered the discount on that. So what they actually are doing is that they are trying to increase the revenues further by putting on the sales of the highest selling commodity. Right. So this is one of the things that we can actually do with the till data. That till data or the POS data is actually the secondary data, right? Same as the case with the loyalty cards, right? Through the loyalty cards, you will be able to see that which of the customer is actually buying which product and in how much quantity. So if a customer is buying a specific product in a specific high quantity, what you can do is you can actually make things personalized for that customer and offer him or her some discount, right? So that now this discount would actually number one, it is actually going to increase the number revenue also. It is actually going to create a customer loyalty and the brand loyalty. So when we come to the brand loyalty, it is very important where the customer would actually value your brand as compared to the rest of the brands in the market. So this is actually what the internal sources do. Within these internal sources, you can do a lot. You can study the data appropriately, and you can actually use that data to benefit your own company. As far as the external sources are concerned, now the external sources may be the government statistics. EU is one one Eurostat is one of the examples of that. Then trade publications, commercial data, Gallup or Mintel, etc. Now, this Gallup is basically also in Pakistan. They actually collect the data. Most of the time, when you actually see the pre-polls, when you see the pre-polls during the elections, and then they actually say that this is any of the party might has a probability of winning from such and such area. It's actually the Gallup which is holds that survey, and when they collect the data, they actually provide the results publicly. Household expenditure survey, then magazine survey, other firms research. Now this other firms research is basically about the competitors. Similarly, the research documents, publications in general. So basically this external sources might be anything. You might get the household expenditure of the surveys from somewhere, and then you can actually see that what do the people actually think. Similarly, you might have the government-based statistics, which actually might lead toward the pricing strategy, or maybe something else within the marketing mix, right? So your internal sources and the external sources, both these sources are really very important as far as the secondary data is concerned. But most of the time, the secondary sources, um, instead of the secondary sources, is actually the internal sources, which external sources, basically the internal sources, which come into the play most of the time, right? Because in Pakistan, most of the external sources might not be available. Internationally, it is available, and it's publicly available. It's publicly available for purchase. The data is there to purchase, right? But in Pakistan, the data cannot be purchased just like that, right? So that's the reason why most of the companies, they go for the internal sources rather than the external sources, or they collect the primary data by themselves. Now, coming to the primary data, when we talk about the primary data is something which you actually collect firsthand from someone, mostly from the customers. Yes, right. That is how the primary data is. This primary data is basically the first-hand information, which is collected either based upon the questionnaires, or the focus groups, or the user groups, or the postal surveys, telephone surveys, customer interviews, test markets, or maybe technology or the internet feedback. Now, let's actually get into a little bit of a detail of all these things over here, through the sources through which we can actually collect the primary data. Now, questionnaires over here. These questionnaires are mostly the questionnaires that you would see yes/no questionnaire, or might be a possibility. If you go to any restaurant and they're going to ask you, did you like the taste of the food? You'd say it's a yes/no question. Did you like the atmosphere? It's a yes/no question. Did you like the services? You'd like yes or no. And there'd be one more question, which would be on a Likert scale from 1 to 5, or 1 to 7, or a 1 to 10 scale, which would say from 1 to 10, will you rate the ambience of which was provided to you within the restaurant? And this ambience, which is actually from the scale of 1 to 10, is actually the Likert scale, and they are actually measuring it on the base of the Likert scale, right? So these are the questionnaires which would come in handy when you're taking a customer's feedback, or you would like to see also what generally customers think about your product. That is where these questionnaires are usually used. These questionnaires can be the postal service as well. You can actually you can send them out to your customers as a postal survey, and ask them to return it back to you through through the same envelope that which you have posted it. So what you actually do is you bear the expenses of all the postage, and ask the customer to just fill in the survey and send them back to you, right? Similarly, you can ask the questionnaires on the telephone as well, but you can also do an interview on telephone. So it's both the things are possible. You can ask the questions on the telephone. You can ask the, this quantitative questionnaire on the telephone or the interview as well. Now, let me make this thing clear that the questionnaires that we actually discussed over here are basically quantitative. There are two types of questionnaires. One is basically the qualitative questionnaires, and then another one is quantitative questionnaires. When we come to the qualitative questionnaires, it's basically what we're talking about, the interviews, focus groups, user groups. It's most likely the interviews that we are doing. It's basically the one-to-one interaction with the customer that we are doing. When we talk about the questionnaires, which has more like a yes/no question or a Likert scale question, just like I said, it is a quantitative questionnaire, right? So this quantitative questionnaire cannot be used in the focus groups. It cannot be used in the user groups. So in the focus groups, it cannot be used. The quantitative questionnaire cannot be used. In the user groups, mostly the quantitative questionnaires cannot be used. Postal service, yes, it can be used. A telephone service, it can be used. Your customer interviews, no. Customer interviews are something else. Either quantitative questionnaires are not your customer interviews. Test market is something else. So test market, you may actually ask it as quantitative and qualitative both, because test market is basically something which usually is a sample which is being tested on the customers. For example, you go to a mall or you go somewhere where either of the vendors, let's assume, might be a possibility, Sabroso or Menu or KNN, one of the representatives from either of these three brands is standing over there, and they actually offer you something which as a sample, right, to test. And they say that, okay, fine, just have this one chicken nugget as a sample, and let's know, because this is something new in the market that we are offering. Just taste it and let us know about the taste, whether you liked it or not. And that is how they actually collect the data. Similarly, when you go to the cologne or the perfume shops or the body shops, there must be one representative with a stick in his hand and spraying the cologne or the perfume on the stick and asking you to smell it. So if you and tell them and give them the feedback whether you like the smell or not. So this is basically what a test market is, right? So the brands, what they usually do is they go personally from one crowd to another crowd, from one place to another place, and they ask the customers to test their product so that they can actually get the feedback whether the customers liked it or not. And this is more like sort of a qualitative as well, because what you are doing is you are actually asking the customers in qualitative terms that whether they liked it or not. You're not asking the customer to actually fill in a survey form where it's like that you liked it from one on the scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, right? So that is the reason why it's just in a mixed sort of uh, qualitative and quantitative both. Now, when we talk about the technology, but it's more for quality. I market more as a qualitative rather than quantitative, but it can be both, right? When we talk about the technology and internet feedback, the technology and the internet feedback is the same thing then, as I discussed earlier, that most of the larger organizations, what they generally do is they have larger information system implemented at the back end. Right, where the customers can actually go and interact with that information system and give their feedback to the organization. Now, when we actually talk about the information system, specifically internet feedback, when we come away, now we can also include the social media in this. We can also talk about the information system about this at a very smaller scale. Remember one thing, at a smaller scale, you cannot implement might not have the resources to, implement the information system. So generally, it's the larger organizations which actually do that, but you might have the resources to actually develop a Facebook page, or you might have your presence on Twitter, you might have your presence on LinkedIn. So you can actually use those channels to actually market yourself and get the feedback from the customers. or get the feedback from multiple sources. Uh, uh, as of being the smaller setup, uh, uh, you might not have the resources to go for a quantitative research as well, which is actually the questionnaires, which is completely quantitative, right? Because for being a quantitative, for the quantitative research, you actually require a larger sample size, right? And this is exactly what we are going to actually discuss over here in sampling method in the coming up lectures, right? You might not have enough resources so that you can actually distribute amongst the 300 respondents or 800 respondents or 1500 respondents or maybe 20,000 respondents. So you might not have the money to do it. You might not have the resources to do it. You might not have the people to do it. So what you do is you start with the networking. Basically, what is networking? It might actually come up with the interviews from a one-to-one interview, which is mentioned over here, just right here, right? It's just one-to-one interview. Then it might be the user groups or the focus groups that you are actually discussing about, right? You might have a group of 10 people who from different places who might be giving you an input that what should exactly be it like when they actually buy that product. Now remember, they're saying that the focus group or the user group should actually be your potential target market, right? So when you actually do it, they're going to tell you that what is actually whether they are the potential market or not. That is also a possibility. So in totality, the primary research is something which you are actually getting the first-hand information from the customers, right? It might be qualitative, it might be quantitative. Secondary research, we have already discussed. It's the internal resources and the external resources. Why are we doing this all primary research and the secondary research? Because we want some of the purposes to get filled. That might be one of the problems that we actually might be seeing. We have a list of the purposes over here, listed all over here, right? So this is all till now. With the primary research and the secondary research and the purposes. So these are the basics of your market research. Till next time, if you have any queries, do let me know. Just comment below the video, or there's going to be a live session on Thursday, 10 a.m. Just be there when you have any queries from this lecture. Till next time, stay safe and stay at your home. We'll meet next time. Allah Hafiz and bye-bye.